Hi, this is Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of the Contrarian. I am so happy to welcome Representative Melanie Stansbury from the great state of New Mexico. Welcome.
It's great to be here.
A beautiful, beautiful state, folks. If you haven't been, you must go. We are sitting here on the 17th of September, 13 days away from the end of the fiscal year. What are the Republicans doing to keep the government open?
Well, that is a really good question. It would be nice to know what their actual plan is. So yeah, we know that they've proposed a short-term continuing resolution, which continues the current funding that we're under that would get us till November, but we don't know what their plan is after that. And, there's a lot of issues with a short-term CR, namely that our federal programs that have not had their budgets updated don't have the opportunity to do that, but also because the Republicans have been so distracted for the last 9 months with passing their big ugly bill to give permanent tax breaks to billionaires, to gutting Americans' healthcare and food assistance and college programs, that they haven't even bothered to try to figure out how to fund the federal government. And meanwhile, you've got folks like Russell Vogt over at OMB who are essentially gutting programs from the inside without any federal oversight. And so Democrats are in a situation where unless we see a willingness by the Republicans to actually address some of these issues, we may be facing a shutdown.
And it is important to keep reminding people over and over again, Republicans have the White House. Republicans have a majority in both houses. So it is their responsibility to keep things running. I want to zero in on something important you said about OMB. If you make some sort of deal with the Republicans, what's to stop them from coming back with another rescission bill that basically cuts out a bunch of what you just agreed to?
Well, in fact, they do plan to put forward another rescission deal. And for folks out there that don't follow this closely, I used to actually work at OMB. I was a career staffer in the in the Obama White House. And so there's a lot of technical jargon, but here's how it breaks down. The United States Constitution says Congress holds the purse. So it's our job to appropriate the dollars. We provide congressional authority and the executive branch executes. Literally, it's in the title of what their job is. And so the executive branch doesn't get to decide whether to spend or not to spend. That is Congress's prerogative. But the current OMB director has been trying to stretch presidential authority and executive authority and claim that he has the authority to either hold on to money that he doesn't want to spend or to change programs without congressional authority. And time again, there's been lawsuits in the courts. The courts have the Constitution is very clear on this issue. But he did, the OMB director did transmit a rescissions package this summer, and that gutted USAID, UN programs, and PBS and NPR.
Right.
And they fully plan to do it again this fall. And now he's claiming that he can do what's called pocket rescissions, which is basically just whatever the hell he wants. And the law is not on his side. I mean, all you got to do is read the Constitution yourself. But we are experiencing an administration that doesn't seem to have any regard for the rule of law. So we're just going to have to keep holding them accountable in the courts.
Do they have enough Republican votes to get it through on the House side, or are they going to fall apart before it even gets over to the Senate?
Well, this is always the interesting question. I mean, even, it's interesting. A few months ago, there was a lot of hay made because a rule failed on the floor. And for folks that don't know House procedure, is very unusual for a Speaker of the House because in the House, the Speaker controls everything. You don't put anything on the floor you don't think is going to pass. And you have to pass a rule that has all the information about how you're going to debate bills before you start on the bills. And the first time it happened this Congress, it was the first time in 27 years that a rule had failed on the floor. And this is almost a daily occurrence now. In fact, just yesterday, they put a rule on the floor that would give away Congress's authority to rein in Trump's tariffs, which are also illegal and unconstitutional. And on the floor. They were stuck there for an hour because there were Republicans that were like, actually, we don't want to give up Congress's authority. And they did end up flipping 2 votes. But there are several people, including Congressman Massey. And if you follow Marjorie Taylor Greene's social media, she's been blowing up the leadership about a CR. So the answer to your question is, I don't know, but it doesn't look good. But I will say that, the Trump administration has been highly effective in whipping votes, even amongst an unruly Republican caucus.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's really helpful information that even on a daily basis, Johnson doesn't have control. And something tells me if he had the votes right this moment, they would be voting. But as of this moment, he almost certainly doesn't have it. Whether that will change is what we're going to all look at. Let's switch over to your oversight hat. You sit on the oversight. What is going on with the Epstein files? We were told they were going to release everything, and now you have Kash Patel over in another hearing saying, I can't release them because of court orders, which is just false.
Yeah.
Where do things stand with that?
Yeah, well, let me just also zoom out a little bit, because I think not everyone has been totally paying attention to why the Epstein situation is such an important investigation. As I like to say, sometimes the crimes are as important as the cover up. And in this
Yes.
case, we are seeing an active cover up by the White House. And it is very reminiscent of the Watergate scandal, because it's very clear that the President of the United States is threatening members of Congress from trying to get these files released. He's threatening them from getting on a discharge petition that would require a vote on the floor. FBI has refused to release the files that they do have. And I want to just explain why this case is so important. First of all, the crimes that Jeffrey Epstein himself personally committed were never fully investigated and prosecuted. He was given a non-prosecution agreement, the sweetheart deal, in which Alex Acosta, who was a U.S. attorney at the time, basically gave him a get out of jail free card. I mean, he was under house arrest for a number of months, but he was still even allowed out on work release. But behind that is a vast network of institutions, government agencies that were complicit in and understood that Jeffrey Epstein and his associates were involved in criminal activity that was expansive. It wasn't just sexual abuse and violence against women and children. It was financial crimes, including international financial crimes and money laundering. It involved international banks and domestic banks. There was reports last week that JP Morgan knew very well what Epstein was involved in, but he made money for the bank, so they kept him as a client. It involves the government cover-up that involved DOJ. And Alex Acosta himself was given a Trump nomination in the first Trump administration. And let us not forget that when Epstein died in jail after that non-prosecution agreement was rescinded in a way, it was under Trump's watch. It was under his federal watch. And so what I can tell you unequivocally is that the victims have told us what they know is in those files. And so the oversight Democrats have subpoenaed the files. The DOJ has not complied. They gave us already publicly available documents. You now have an active cover-up by the FBI director and by the president. And I can tell you that crimes were committed, crimes were investigated. The public has not seen the files, and we will use every piece of our authority to conduct oversight and to run this case down, because it not only implicates, obviously, Epstein and his associates, but it's very clear that Donald Trump is implicated somewhere in these files. And so we're going to get to the bottom of it. We plan to do more subpoenas, and in 2 days, we will be conducting a day-long deposition of Acosta to understand what he knows and what happened in this case.
Right. Well, as you say, there are a couple Congresspeople who unusually in this case have been quite outspoken, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tom Massey. And now that the president and the Republicans need their votes for a continuing resolution, they too might be able to help out one more time. And just to be clear, folks, we don't know the full extent that's in there. There are allegations, and right now they are allegations because people were never investigated fully and indicted. And what we're talking about is finding out the scope of what was going on, banks, other associates, and more importantly, why it was that there was never really a robust investigation of this. Why wasn't the FBI looking in this? Why weren't the financial watchdogs looking at that? So that's kind of where we sit right now. We know there's a mountain of evidence and we need to see it. And if, in fact, none of it is true and no one did anything wrong beyond Jeffrey Epstein, then we should know about it. I personally don't think that's necessarily true, but let's have at it. I want to switch gears just a little bit in the time remaining we have to talk about how the Trump administration is kind of hollowing out the government. We've seen the very brave former officials at the CDC testify this morning about being forced to sort of sign off in advance their approval for a vaccine change that they hadn't even seen yet. We've seen FBI hollowing out and a lawsuit brought by several FBI agents. Tell me about the extent of the kind of dysfunction that is now going in government as good people, experienced people have been chased out and they're either not replaced or they're replaced with lackeys and ignoramuses who don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, well, I think, again, kind of zooming out, this administration came in with a plan, and that plan was Project 2025, and it's all actually very much laid out agency by agency. They had a plan for reshaping the federal government, and then they added this extra chaos factor by allowing Elon Musk in to also chaotically conduct this Doge enterprise, which resulted in tens and tens of thousands of people being fired, put on administrative leave, and taking a deferred retirement. And so this has left these agencies in complete chaos. In many cases, you had agencies with experts who'd been there for decades who just said, I can't do this anymore, so I'm going to take the deferred retirement. You had people who were in transition who got fired during the probationary mass firings. And then there's actually hiring freezes in most of the agencies. And so they can't even backfill vacant positions. And so, name a thing the federal government does, from making sure that there's research and development to have the latest vaccines out, to clinical trials, to making sure money gets out for paving roads, to making sure you have clean water coming out of the tap. The federal government has been completely decimated from a human capital standpoint. And in addition to that, they have put both Doge and White House babysitters in the secretary's offices of these agencies, as well as political appointees who are hostile to the missions of these agencies. And so in some ways, it is a carefully executed plan in the sense that they are carrying out Project 2025, but in another way, it's just chaos. It's just unplanned chaos. And, I think we're already seeing the impacts of this in so many different ways, whether it's, flight failures and airports across the country, or, I was just meeting with tribal leaders an hour ago, and they, funding being frozen for Meals on Wheels programs and senior centers. There's just countless programs that it's disrupting people's lives. But I think there's another more nefarious aspect to all of this, and that is that day after day, we are seeing how this administration, in my mind, is more and more taking on what we saw with Viktor Orban and with other more autocratic leaders, where they hollow out these agencies, they demonize people that are opposed to or ask questions about what they do, and who, and particularly in this moment, in the wake of the horrible violence that happened last week, are using it as an opportunity to try to silence dissent. And so we're living in a very troubling time.
Absolutely. You make such a good point about weaponizing government and also the dysfunction. What can the House Oversight Dems do to kind of surface that? Can you go to the inspectors general? Can you find whistleblowers within the agencies? And on the weaponization to some of that may be challenged in court, but to make that a more visible priority on the Hill, what are the House Oversight Dems thinking of doing?
Yeah, well, the way that I break it down is, we fight back in the courts, in Congress, and in our communities. And right now, the most powerful tool is the courts, because we still have a fair and independent judiciary, even though they're also being harassed and threatened.
Yes.
We have judges all across the United States that literally are having things sent to their homes as like warnings for decisions they've made in federal cases. But I would say by and large, judges who are appointed by both Democrats and
Yes.
Republicans are ruling in favor of the people in these court cases. And so as members of Congress, we're partnering with organizations bringing these lawsuits, whether they're unions, nonprofit organizations, tribes, states. And that is very much a part of the legal strategy. But in Congress, we have limited capability in the House in particular because of the House rules. You can see it, look at the FBI oversight hearing in the Senate yesterday. I think that the Republican senators feel more empowered to ask hard questions. We're not seeing that here in the House. In the House, it is like knock down, drag out fights every single day, trying to reveal the plot, if you will. And tomorrow, for example, in the Oversight Committee, Donald Trump's legal authority is now expired for deploying National Guard to DC. So House Republicans are bringing in the mayor and city councilor to yell at them in front of the public. And so our job on the Oversight Committee is to reveal the plot, to show what they're actually up to and how they're using the tools of government to intimidate people and to intimidate the people of this country, and to hold their feet to the fire as well, as they're complicit in what this administration is doing. But our tools are very limited right now in the minority. But I can tell you, when we take back the House, there's going to be some very serious accountability, and I think the public well knows what's coming.
Well, I think revealing the plot is a perfect way of putting it. Thank you, Congresswoman, for coming on and sharing, and thank you for everything you're doing to reveal the plot. We will look forward to having you back soon.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely.